is email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Keith Ferrazzi, the author of 2 of my favorite books, Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back. We're talking about his latest book, Leading Without Authority, How the New Power of Co-Elevation Can Break Down Silos, Transform Teams, and Reinvent Collaboration, that's coming out on May 26. Keith, let's talk about accountability. And I know that's a big thing as well. You have to have mutual accountability, and most of the world today works in a matrix organization where, as you said earlier, you don't really control the people on your team. So how do you leverage the accountability aspect of what we're doing here?
That's a big opportunity, which is, I believe accountability needs to shift from accountability to you as a leader into you facilitating accountability that's peer-to-peer among your team. That's a huge burden shift. What that means is the next time you walk into your team, you're sitting there looking at a group of people that are not only committed to their outcomes, but are committed to making sure that every single one of those people cross the finish line at the same time to win. Because if any of them doesn't cross the finish line together, I don't give a damn that 5 out of 6 is across the finish line. If that 6 doesn't get across, we all lose. But that's not the way we think today. What we think is, oh, that's that person's job, and that's the CEO's job, is to make sure that happens. But the reality is, you as a leader need to shift accountability and responsibility into the fabric of the team itself. They need to hold each other accountable. They need to hold each other accountable. That doesn't exist in most rules of work, but it can. I want accountability to be as strong and as rigorous as ever before, but I want to shift it to not just be hub and spoke to you, but be peer-to-peer to the team.
Yeah, we've always found in my experience at least, is we do a lot of that. We establish those bonds of accountability through our face-to-face contact up front, where I turn you from an email address into a living, breathing human being that I actually have some connection to. So in today's world, with where we're working remotely, and I work with a lot of big clients as well that are global, how do you find it's more difficult to establish those relationships, or to be able to drop the guard with somebody that you've only known through the Zoom meeting or through email?
So I do this a lot in my team coaching, where I get people to imagine what elements of being remote is struggled or challenged or subpar to being face-to-face. And then when we identify them, we start going one by one and start imagining, how could we recreate that thing for a remote world that would even be better? So let's talk about this. You're alluding to the idea that being co-located is an empathy creator. It builds relationships. It versus a Zoom call, which is much more transactional, less emotionally connected, right? Is that what you're
suggesting? That's exactly it. Yeah.
A lot of people think. But let's just pause for a moment between the two of us. What if I said to you, what are you most struggling with right now in life? And yesterday I had 15 CHROs, heads of HR, big companies, on a Zoom call. And I started it, we had an hour and a half, and I started and took 15 minutes. And I said, let's all spend 1 minute just talking about what we're most struggling with. Somebody had lost a brother to COVID, and they haven't been able to bury him. Multiple individuals concerned about their parents who are across the country and aging and at risk, and how they're dealing, and how are they getting groceries? Are they still going out shopping? All those kind of questions, right? Mm-hmm. We heard about people struggling with the fact that they're about to furlough 30% of their staff, their organization. We heard it. So we heard all of these things, and that I got to tell you, had we just had a meeting in an office where that group of 15 came in, had a lovely coffee talk and chatted with each other, and then went into a meeting and talked about, and we were there to talk about a new foundation that I've launched called Go Forward to Work. If we had just come together for that meeting, we would not have gone as deep as we did, with the intention of me saying, okay, what are you struggling with? We engineered intimacy. We engineered relationship. We engineered give a damn. And I talk about that in the book. Your job is to engineer give a damn, engineer commitment to each other. the solidification of loyalty of a team is your job, to create peer to peer. But what do we normally do? What we normally do is allow our teams to talk about each other behind each other's backs. We allow individual members of the team come and whisper in our ear that somebody's letting them down, right? And not have enough courage or care to share that with each other. And we don't even know where the human element is, and I've got employees right now who are juggling without childcare and spousal relationships that are strained as a result of this. And there's a lot going on, and leaders can't just assume that that's irrelevant. The answer is anything you're worried about in a remote environment, we can engineer to do almost anything. And that's where, and we created a website called virtualteamswin.com. virtualteamswin.com. And anybody interested in learning more about how they can run their virtual teams more effectively than their co-located teams is really just, it's a click away. There's a lot of evidence now that that's true.
So it sounds like if you can accomplish some of the same things, but you have to be more intentional and proactive, as opposed to what we might find organically by having a coffee break together and just chit-chatting. You have to be intentional about what's really affecting you today, what's really going on in your world. You have to be more proactive about trying to engage people than you would maybe if you were face-to-face every day.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about go forward to work then. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, basically I've been so sick and tired of everybody talking about going back to work. And I'm like, no, don't go back to work, because we go back to work, the chances are you're going to start adopting old practices, principles, values, mindsets that weren't working for us before and certainly won't work for us going forward. And I just wrote an article on LinkedIn. If your people want to go to my LinkedIn site at Keith Ferrazzi on LinkedIn, the post is go forward to work, not back. That post went viral. Just tens and tens of thousands, like over 100,000 people saw it in like 2 hours. It was crazy. The idea was in that particular piece is to say, we have seen our teams behave better in the last 2 months than they often have ever behaved before. They've been acting like a co-elevating team. I've heard more people say, how can I help you? I've seen more vulnerability. I've seen more co-creation. We are doing agile sprints, adapting what we're doing on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, depending upon what's going on in the marketplace, what we're hearing from folks. So it is so important that you really make a lot of attention paid to being very purposeful about work today. Very purposeful, not accidental, right? That is what's so important and critical. And to me, it's a part of this commitment. I think that all teams need to create a new contract for work, and it's a contract to co-elevate. And the book goes over, there's like 8 critical elements: the candor, the co-creation, right? All of these elements of a co-elevating relationship. Let's bring those out and discuss them openly among a team, and to recontract it and say, we will behave this way. And these are the practices that behave this way. And so what I'm doing is I've just hired the former managing editor of one of the largest magazines in the world. I'm staffing up an editorial team, and we're going around and we are finding the most important best practices that we have been innovating in the last 2 months, and we're documenting them. And it's going to be on goforwardtowork.com. And I want teams to realize they don't have to go back to old working ways. Co-elevating is the principle of the future, and that needs to be marbled into all elements of our work. We're bringing co-elevation now and the principle of leading without authority to vendor communities. I've got companies that are rethinking how they're managing their vendor relationships, right? Vendor relationships are being rethought totally. And their vendor relationships are becoming co-elevating. And they're creating peer-to-peer support groups among their vendor community, supporting each other, co-elevating teams of vendors, trying to create value and help both the vendors create value and the clients create value. So I'm seeing such rich applications of this. I do not want to go back to an old hierarchical, authoritative, rigid org chart boxed in way of working. We've been bullshitting ourselves for 20 years talking about the future of work. Well, it just happened. Let's not go back. Let's go forward.
I like it. And I think that's also going to help in some of the work that I've seen done. There's people have this mentality of wanting just to check something off their to-do list and move on to the next thing and throw it over the fence. And I think co-elevation gets people more engaged and more passionate about us winning together. And even with the example you just gave about supply chain, so it's not a win-win where I win and you lose, so I win twice. It's about we win together. We both get more than we would have gotten individually, which I think is really powerful stuff.
Exactly.
So with your first two books, Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back, how did they influence or inform your latest book? Did they have an impact, or it's just a natural evolution?
It's so important that we sort of see the principles in this book evolved from a poor kid in Pittsburgh when I was, back in the 70s, growing up as a poor immigrant Italian kid. My dad was an unemployed steel worker. My mom was a cleaning lady. And it was through managing my network with generosity, with authenticity, showing up in relationship with others that opened up doors that would have never been available to me. And I've told you those stories, right? That gave me the permission to write Never Eat Alone. Extraordinary success young. And I didn't realize, I didn't have a word for it, but I was a co-elevating leader when I was at Deloitte. That's what gave me that crazy success at a young age. Deloitte wanted to advance its brand, its marketing. And the CEO said that he wanted his legacy to be taking the brand to the next level. And I was just a stupid kid. I didn't know any better. So I went and did a research study on what were the best practices of professional services marketing. And I presented it to him. He was blown away. He'd never seen that kind of ambition, drive, and insight. And the next thing you know, I'm the youngest elected partner in the company ever and the chief marketing officer of the firm in my late 20s. Early 30s. It was just stupid and crazy that it happened. And that's Never Eat Alone. Now, you go from there and you ask yourself, I started studying relations. Once I realized relationships were crucial to our business success, I started studying them. And I started realizing that it wasn't just relationships and networks, it was interdependency. And I wrote Who's Got Your Back? And that idea that a few really deep relationships that are lifeline relationships and won't let you fail in your life were precipitously important. Then the third thing I did is I realized that is business today. We're living in networks. And therefore, how do I apply this to leadership? And that's been an 8-year to 10-year research project, which created Leading Without Authority. And look, what I love about Leading Without Authority is I really tried, when I wrote Never Eat Alone, I wrote it with a writing partner. It was like eating popcorn. It was so easy to consume, lots of nuggets of information. People loved it. Then I was like, now I'm going to go hard and I'm going to write this very research-oriented book. And I wrote Who's Got Your Back? And even though it popped real quick because everyone knew me and it got #1 New York Times bestseller, did not sell as well because it wasn't as consumable. It was a tough book to get through for people. And so this one, I tried to match the two. Tried to bring a system, but I tried to make it much more easily consumable, colloquial, make it easier to consume and get the points and get the practices and the tactics. And I do believe I've achieved that. I'm very excited about it.
Having read all three of them, I've enjoyed all three, and I've taken something that I can use every day in my life in all three of them. So I'm happy to have you on my show.
Oh, that's so kind.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you, Keith, that you're really passionate about you'd like to talk about before we sign off?
I'm so in belief. We have seen co-elevation in action during this COVID crisis. We've seen it in how medical communities have come together. We've seen it in how families and tribes have come together for each other. We haven't seen it as much in governments, unfortunately. I think we need to create and adopt this as a new standard for our life and our values. To me, if you're faith-based or religious-oriented in any way, you'll recognize the principles of really coming together as a community in support of each other. And I think we need this more than ever in our lives, in our families, in our businesses. And to be truly exponential, to find unexpected growth, which we need to do today, to identify unsuspected risk, risk is now abundant all around us. We need to be co-elevating. I'm very happy with the fact that so many people who read this book, so many major CEOs claim that this really is an operating system for the new world that we're in today. And I look forward to you reading it, getting it, consuming it, and having it impact your life in both a professional and a personal way. And then from a remote basis, definitely go to virtualteamswin.com and consume any of the information there that I think could be beneficial to people. And how do we adopt all of these? How do we become co-elevating in a remote basis in our teams?
Well, I appreciate that. My conversation with you today has been both educational and motivational. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks a lot, Clint. What a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett. To find out more about Clint, go to projectsuccess.com or pick up Clint's book, The Project Success Method, at amazon.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.